Small sample sizes are, in fact, important. We tell you why when it comes to the Bucks lineups. Coming up next on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, each and every day here on the show. And we said at the top, Camille, small sample size. You've heard me reach the importance of a larger sample of data to go off of. We went back to John Horst's interview where he talked about sample size, and we believe in larger sample sizes where you can truly believe in something. But he himself noted, not the case with the things that we leaned into, but we do truly believe what we saw towards the end of the season is what's important. So that's where we start today's show, with a small sample. And that is with, I think, one of the things John Horst referenced in his interview with Eric Name, the four-man lineup that consisted for the Bucks a season ago of Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., and AJ Green. Those lineups, we only saw 224 trips down the floor. So incredibly small when you factor in there's 100 possessions basically for each team in a game. So we're talking about basically two games that group played for 48 minutes. But in those 224 possessions, the Bucks were a plus 42.4 net rating. Goes without saying, that's in the 100th percentile. Their offensive rating would have been the best in NBA history at 138.8. And their defense would have been even better than the Oklahoma City Thunder and best that we had seen in quite some time, probably going back to the mid-90s at 96.4. So that's just with those four guys together at any point during a game. And you get the sense of, okay, it's not a lot to pull from, but yeah, I'm with John Horst on that front of we'd love to see more of this, but I believe in what we're going to invest in here.
Yeah, and that's why it was so important to bring those guys back, because you did see the smaller sample size of what they could do on the court. Now it's time to be like, okay, if we really are going to do this, one, do we think that what we saw is sustainable over a larger period of time on the court? Now, being 100th percentile, that piece of it, who knows, like that might be a pipe dream, but like the general idea of, can this work? And I think that you found the format of why it can work, because you're able to space the floor with shooters and you have the defense out there as well with the four of them on the court. So like, it's something to continue to build around, which is why like the conversation that we've been having so far this offseason around what's the best starting lineup combination for the Milwaukee Bucks? What does that look like? What's the benefit of having, Kevin Porter Jr. or Ryan Rollins, so on and so forth? Like, it's been the conversation, but like, based on what we've seen, we have a small sample size of what works. So the question is, one, how sustainable do you think it is over a larger period of time? And then two, like, if we do roll out this lineup, if we play this lineup more often with these four guys, one, who's the fifth? We kind of have an idea who that is. And also, like, how often can you get them on the court together?
So looking a little bit deeper into those lineups, there are only two that the Bucks trotted out there with those four guys of Giannis, Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., and AJ Green. There was a total of 6 groupings. So 6 different times that somebody else was the fifth guy. Only 2 of them yielded negative results. So a negative net rating. Who would you guess were the fifth players involved in those 2 lineups?
With a negative offensive line rating with them, I would have
negative across the board.
Was Kuz one of them?
The Kyle Kuzma lineup was Kuz at the 4 and Giannis at the 5. That was a negative 6.3 net rating and just a 101.7 offensive rating.
My instinct wants to say Brook, but a lot of the Brook lineups actually had like pretty decent numbers when he was on the court. Um, let's go. We'll put like an Andre Jackson Jr. I'm not sure if we even saw that down the
We
stretch,
did
but
not. So I'll let you
yeah,
pick again. We did not see Andre
I don't think we
Jackson.
even saw. As I was saying, I don't think we even saw him down the stretch. Is it Torian Prince?
It was Torian Prince. Only 6 possessions with Torian Prince at the 4 next to Giannis at the 5. But that was a 300 defensive rating. So every trip down the floor resulted in a 3 for the opponents and a negative 183.3 overall net rating, which is very hard to do in any era of basketball. So, yes, I'm sure it would be the surprise to very few of our viewers and listeners that the 2 negative lineups with those 4 guys included Torian Prince and Kyle Kuzma. So knowing that baseline, and again, small sample size, you can't reiterate it enough, but knowing that baseline of those 4 guys and the numbers that we saw, is there one particular grouping that you're saying, I'd really like to see some extended looks of those 4 guys with this guy? Is there one player that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I think the first one you go to is the Myles Turner edition. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's the obvious one to go to. So outside of Myles Turner, because I think that 5 should be the starting lineup for the Bucks going into the season. Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent Jr., AJ Green, Giannis, and Myles Turner. I'm actually going to go with the 5-man grouping that we saw a bit in the playoffs and down the stretch last year, and with Bobby being that 5th guy. Because one, if I remember correctly, the numbers with the 5-man grouping of them also not a large sample size in the regular season in particular, but they played really well when they were on the court together. But the other piece of that for me is what we saw from Bobby Portis last year defensively was a bit different than what we've seen in years past. What I want to see in this year with that 5-man lineup is like, was that real or is that a mirage as well? Like, did we find something different with Bobby Portis to help unlock him in ways defensively that we had not seen prior in his time in Milwaukee? And it's not to say like I think Bobby's about to come out here and be like a defensive stopper or something along those lines, but like I'm just really curious too when you have Bobby out there and the style of defense that you choose to play while he's out there. What does that look like consistently? And what can you get out of that? Like, I'm really curious. And I'm also curious about what some of the Giannis at 5 lineups look like, because I keep wrestling with the question of what are the other 4 guys there? Like, who's your small ball 4 on the Milwaukee Bucks? Like, you mentioned the Kuz numbers that we've seen, like Kuz, Giannis front court. Does that really work? Do you go with Jericho Sims, but the spacing concerns there? Do you roll with Torian Prince? But again, you pulled the numbers in the very small sample size from last year. Or do you go really small and you just really run out there with 4 guards? Like I've been wrestling with that one of like, if the Bucks do want to play Giannis at the 5, who is the small ball 4 option for this team?
Okay, so the last thing that you brought up was where I was going to take it. That I am fascinated to see those types of lineups, basically 4 guards and Giannis, because we saw it a couple times. There was, and again, none of this is a large sample, but the smallest of the sample sizes was a group that was those 4 guys and Damian Lillard. But you also had the 3rd most frequently used 5-man lineup with under the view of those 4 guys was Pat Connaughton at the 4. And it yielded some pretty good results. It was a plus 66 net rating and an 88.9 defensive rating, just 36 possessions.
Right.
But, it gets you into, we didn't see Ryan Rollins with that group. You've got a guy that we talked about. Maybe he's not, a quote unquote good defender, but has some interesting traits. And that's Cole Anthony that you could slot in there as well and see, okay, Giannis and 4 guys that can stretch the floor. I'm interested in seeing that, especially knowing, again, not a lot, but how much success you saw with Pat Connaughton playing the 4. And the other one was, you mentioned the Bobby Portis at the 5 with those guys. That was what we saw the most down the stretch. And that was a plus 54 net rating and a 96.6 defensive rating. So That's what I would anticipate we're going to see quite a bit of this upcoming season. Even the Kyle Kuzma at the 4 next to Giannis and those guys saw 58 possessions worth of it. But I think it's something they're certainly going to be invested in more to see, okay, we believe in Kuzma, everything that we've talked about with the interviews from various John Horst, Doc Rivers, and everyone else. We believe in this guy, and we think it will work in these settings. I think you're going to see some of that. And the one thing that's most helpful about those lineups is Kuzma may not be a good 3-point shooter, at least not the version of Kuzma we saw last year, but he's willing.
Mhm.
And that's the other important part with stretching the defense. When you look at the roster, there's only one non-shooter on this team when you put that caveat there of Kyle Kuzma. You may not think of him as a shooter. He's willing to take the shot, and we've seen varying levels of success throughout his career. Now it's just Giannis, and literally every single lineup you trot out there, assuming guys like Andre Jackson Jr. and our boy Chris Livingston are not going to get huge playing time. Jericho Sims too, sure. But all the regulars in your top 8-9 guys, they're all shooters outside of Giannis.
Yeah, so that's like the question of like, so then what do you do if you do want to play the small ball? Which way do you go? And it's like, what improvements could a Taurean Prince make if you are going to come back this season and be like, hey, you know what? Last year, we did a lot with playing you in that as a 2, but we are thinking of you more so this year as a 3-4, some small ball lineups. I mean, even when they brought Kuz over, part of the allure of bringing Kyle Kuzma to the Bucks, in addition to the youth and everything like that, was, can he help unlock these Giannis at the 5 lineups? And if you are going to run the 2 of them out there as your front court there, like, we have to figure out a way to make it more productive than what we saw in the smaller sample size last year.
Leave us your thoughts. What's the lineup you're most looking forward to seeing from this group? And, we didn't even touch on the other end of the spectrum when this team goes big. And I think that's going to be something that's common throughout the course of this upcoming season, not just for the Bucks. We'll touch on that and some more reviews coming in for the Milwaukee Bucks offseason. You may not have liked what we shared last time. Is it different this time? We'll let you know coming up after this. Well, if you've ever wished managing your money felt easier, Monarch Money is here to tell you it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. If you're building that wealth with a partner, it's easier now than ever with Monarch Money to track your individual and shared accounts for both of you. And especially if you're saving for a big purchase, maybe you've got a home on the horizon, you're looking to buy a new car, a boat for those of us that have the space for it. Monarch Money helps you reach the steps to complete that goal. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Not even double big, Camille, but the multiple big lineups is certainly going to be something to monitor here. I think we're starting to slowly see more teams leaning into size and throwing double bigs out there, multiple 7-footers. The Bucks, I don't anticipate we'll see it a lot, but you have different views you can go to of, let's play Giannis and Bobby Portis and Myles Turner at the same time. And Giannis is effectively our 3, and we're just throwing waves of size out there at you. So again, I think one of the things we've tried to hammer home throughout this offseason is you may not like the 22.5 that becomes 20.3 or whatever it is anchor that the Bucks have tethered to them for the next 5 years. I get that. You may not like the fact that it's still ambiguous who the clear number 2 is on this team, if in fact there is one, but you can't sleep on the fact that this team is much more versatile now than they've been in quite some time.
They are. And again, said it so often, I'm all every day is probably like, we know, but like having the flexibility is so important. Like the idea of that triple big lineup for the Bucks is also interesting. I saw a few comments along the way too of like, what do you think about Giannis playing the 3 this upcoming year? And it's like, that's a nice option to have. I'd rather see the Bucks go with that lineup that you mentioned of a Giannis, Bobby Portis, Myles Turner over, seeing the Taurean Prince jumbo lineup version where you're sliding him in as the 2 next to Kuz, next to Giannis, next to Myles Turner. Like that one, like we got enough of a sample size to know that when you slide TP down to the 2, it's not necessarily the best use of his talent. But the idea of Giannis as a 3 in some small doses in those jumbo lineups would be another way for the Bucks to lean into what Doc has talked about, which is using their size, making sure that they're bigger than other teams, using their will in that way. So it's interesting to think this is a Bucks team that can go super small, where you do put 4 guards around a big, or you can play in a lineup where you do have 3 quote unquote bigs on the floor operating and taking up space.
We saw that one time last year, triple bigs of Giannis, Brook Lopez, and Bobby Portis on the floor together. Just one time that we saw that happen. Taurean Prince at the 2 is an interesting conversation because it's how do you choose to look at it? We saw it a decent amount of times last year, and I think many would argue we saw it too many times. But the fact is, it worked offensively. They had a 122.2 offensive rating, and I think a lot of that is the looks that were generated for Taurean Prince specifically and his catch and shoot ability and where he was last year on 3-point efficiency. So your offense worked. The other side of the coin was Taurean Prince was taking on guards then. And your defense wasn't horrendous. It wasn't as bad as I think it gets touted as, but 117.1, which would have been in the lower third of the league. So you're looking at like a 20th defensive rating in those instances. But yeah, I mean, you can do that. And I think the biggest thing of all of this is that it just gives you the ability to say, we're going to do this trip down the floor. If this isn't working, we can go to that. And in years past, it's always been like, well, if this doesn't work, we're going to make it work because this is the only way that we can play and the only thing we do. I mean, I'm curious to hear, I don't want to call it spin, but how Doc Rivers frames it now when he said countless times last year, we're not going to win a foot race. We have to win the shot put. That's what this team is. So, like, what's the take on it now? What's the Olympic analogy for this team now?
Hey, that we had to get fast. We had to join the foot race. We had to line up at this line and say, you know what? I guess we do got to run this 100 real quick. So like, let's figure out the personnel for us to do that a little bit better and more efficiently. Because again, I think you have to keep an eye on to what the league is doing. Like there's something to be able to exert how you want to play on the game. And I don't think that the Bucks should lose sight of that because having size can be an advantage. But you also need to be able to be malleable enough to present different forms of play. And you also don't want to continue to play a style of ball that's going to put you in a position that you're kind of behind like the 8 ball when it comes to just like the speed that you're trying to counteract. And on top of that, too, as we've mentioned, like the skill set of Giannis, it lends itself so much to the idea of playing fat, like just getting out there with the younger legs and playing in that way. So it's a bit against what Doc Rivers was talking about, but one could also argue that he went the way that he went because personnel dictated that that's the way that he had to envision the team to play because that's what he had in front of him. But now with some different options, it's like, hey, we can still play big if we want to, but we can also play primarily a different way now because we're able to be faster. We are younger. We can do a little bit more in that way.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the more fascinating things to watch from this group this season are the new lineups that we see and the sample sizes that we've said are small when they become larger and those that we're starting to look at. I mean, we threw out a couple of, I would love to see those 4 guys and Ryan Rollins. I would love to see those 4 guys. And I mean, I'll say it in duck, Kyle Kuzma, just to see how that works. Other names that we mentioned, Cole Anthony too. I'd love to see them lean into playing small and leaning on Giannis. So leave your thoughts on the lineups you are most looking forward to seeing with this new group. Obviously, I'd love to see what it's finally going to look like with Myles Turner at the 5 next to Giannis. as well. But leave your thoughts on those lineups you are specifically looking forward to seeing from the new look Bucks this upcoming season. We mentioned some more reviews coming in for the Bucks on the offseason. We'll get to that, and some more numbers updates and some thoughts I have that need to be addressed on that coming up after this. So, Camille, you've heard me reference the Dunc'd On podcast with Nate Duncan quite a bit. It is probably, you have the Mind the Game podcast that you will tout on every show, and I'm still not convinced there's not any type of kickback in place. Mine is the Dunc'd On podcast, and Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue just put out their Eastern Conference grades. And for the Bucks, we went over the ESPN and CBS Sport. I don't remember. We went over two separate rankings for the Bucks. What letter grade would you guess? The Bucks received from Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue. Noted, if depending on who you ask, some noted Bucks haters through the years.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, well, we knew ESPN came in, I think it was a C+ for their ranking of the Bucks off season.
Yes.
I'm going to guess Dunc'd On came in maybe at like a solid C.
Okay, so they each gave a grade, and one was a B+, the other was an A-.
What? That high?
They were able to do to basically keep everyone in place with what they had, limited assets to do it. And it was interesting too that the one deal that they said they didn't hate but probably disliked the most that the Bucks gave out this offseason, what would your guess be?
Taurean Prince?
Bobby Portis.
Is it the age concerns with Bobby Portis? And
I won't speak for them. I don't think they're Bobby Portis fans. Just the game that he has. And we talked about the defense, certainly much improved a season ago, but I think that's their big hang up in the type of player that he is. But they both acknowledge it's not like it's a terrible contract. I just think, especially if you known you were getting Myles Turner, I don't know if Bobby Portis is quite as important anymore. And maybe I would have put those resources into something else, but still, nonetheless, you're able to, keep all of those guys for basically $5 million a year or less. And there was even something yesterday that came out of an anonymous league insider or front office person, a league executive, saying when asked about the remaining restricted free agents, and Quentin Grimes, one of them that's still searching for a home, of why would I pay Quentin Grimes $20 million per year when I could have gotten Gary Trent Jr. for the minimum?
Yeah.
I'd much rather have that. So to think about the quality that they brought in for that, and even the Myles Turner deal, they had pretty high praise for it, and not some very kind things to say about the Indiana Pacers and their willingness or lack thereof to match it. In that, look, even if things go south, it's a tradable deal. It's not a bad contract. I think it's a value that is certainly fair for Myles Turner and his age. The only real qualm they had was, I believe, they're more in the camp of it's in the Bucks' best interest to just rip off the Band-Aid, rebuild, and move on and trade Giannis. And look, if we're having this conversation every year and maybe next year a trade request happens, then it might change how we view this offseason and say you should have done it a year earlier. But assuming that's not the case, no complaints with what they did, which was very refreshing to hear somebody applying the same logic we've basically spit out there for over a month now.
Yeah, and they were even higher on the offseason than we are.
Yeah.
Like that's impressive. I did not expect to hear that. But I think the Bobby Portis piece of it, part of his importance is what we talked about a bit. I think it was yesterday's show around what do you do in the games when Giannis does sit. And we've also mentioned too, you have to consider the injury history of a Myles Turner. Not to say that he, knock on wood, everybody listening, knock on wood for health for this Bucks team coming up. But to have Bobby Portis in a bench role when you have those types of bigs and he can step in there for either guy if he needed to. If one of those guys is out, you can put Bobby Portis into the lineup. You're not going to get 1-for-1 production from Bobby to what they can give you, but you have a capable big in the game who can stretch the floor, who can get some buckets, And if what we saw last year is something for him to continue to build upon defensively, he's not going to be like a complete net negative out there on the floor, in the sense that we've seen in years past where you're just kind of curious of like, okay, well, drop coverage doesn't seem to really suit Bobby as well, but he's in drop coverage right now. Maybe using him in a more switchable defense is going to be a little bit more beneficial for him. But ultimately, the insurance of Bobby Portis, I think, is really important. And plus, as we just mentioned in the earlier segment, like we have the lineup data. Of course, it is a smaller lineup set, but like when Bobby is out there on the court with Giannis, with Gary Trent Jr., with Kevin Porter Jr., with AJ Green, like you have a lineup that works and you know it works. You can count on it to a certain degree. This is all the caveat, the sample size, but you have something you can lean on and count on. And I think that's part of the importance of Bobby Portis. Like not only is he insurance, but he's also offense off the bench. Like he just gives you a lot.
He does. And the tough thing with Bobby Portis too is a lot of the value is things you can't quantify. And it's a similar conversation will be had if and when that 15th roster spot changes of some of the things you can't necessarily quantify with that player either. But yeah, it was very high marks for a team. And I think that's the big thing is I heard some other show go over the win totals on their most recent show, 2 days ago, rhymes with Troop Collective, and everyone's favorite, as they view an anti-Bucks person, started it with, this is where you lose me, Camille. This isn't the let's bash the national media segment of the show, but you can't start your conversation or your reasoning for why you're down on the Bucks with, well, this team wasn't very good last year and they don't have Damian Lillard now this year, when you said Damian Lillard wasn't good enough last year. So that's right. That's where you kind of start to lose me in that conversation. But yeah, I think I'm going to be curious to see as more of these come out, what the aggregate, what the average is for what we would give the Bucks, because I'm sure there's even lower marks than we've gotten to. And I think the other big thing in the conversation to be had is they analyzed, and their view was the cost and the improvement of, yes, you're taking on that $20+ million dead salary, but if the impact of that is to free up $30 million for the next 2 years, when that cap space is most important with Giannis's looming future and just continuing to get this team better, it's a risk that we think is worth taking for this team. And especially if it's landing you a player like a Myles Turner, opposed to we're just cutting this money to get under the second apron and to save some luxury tax money, that you're actually getting something else on the court out of it. That's the important thing. But the arrival of Myles Turner is because Brook Lopez is gone. And that was never more clear than when the Bucks released more numbers updates. And we learned that Gary Harris is going to be wearing the number 11. Number 11 was worn by a player for 7 years who was a very vital part to your second championship team in franchise history and your first in 50 years, who was one of the best defensive players at his position during those 7 years, who had a remarkable run of longevity and durability with you during that time frame, who proved to be a vital piece on and off the floor for this community and the organization, and who is right now, without question, the greatest free agent signing in Bucks franchise history, and is number 2. I mean, I know Bob Lanier has his number retired. He is the number 2 center in franchise history, if we are not going to say Giannis is a center. And that's Brook Lopez. And I know it's a business, but still seeing that to me, that, oh, wow, he's taken 11 already, was, and we are 2 of the biggest Brook Lopez supporters, but it was still pretty jarring to me to think Man, I don't know. There's going to be a decent amount of pushback of whether or not Brook Lopez should have his number retired. I think he should. But to give it out immediately, that's where it was. If I'm running it and Gary Harris says, I want to wear number 11. All right, Gary, what's choice number 2?
Yeah, because okay, I know some people probably are going to point to well, they gave Dame's number right back out to Kyle Kuzma, and it's they did, but Dame was here for 2 years. Brook Lopez was here, seven years for the Bucks here, part of the championship team, a big part of the championship team. And we saw how the Bucks treated their last championship team with the amount of numbers that they put in the rafters from that team achieving that championship. You would think that Brook Lopez is one of those guys as well. When the news came out that he was going to the Clippers, my first reaction is 11 to the rafters. I think it deserves to be up there, right next to 21, right next to 22. 34, right next to 22. Those 4 guys in particular from the championship
77.
team. No, we ain't doing all that now, but it makes you think too, because I remember when Giannis got his number 34, there were Bucks fans who were upset because they're like, that's Ray Allen's number. You can't give that out. Chris Middleton, that's Michael Redd's number. You can't give that out. And then you have those 2 players in particular who have done such great things for the franchise, where it's those are their numbers now. So it's a difficult one for me to see Brook's number given out in the same summer that he was gone. Ultimately, yes, it's just a number. Yes, you could even still retire 11 down the stretch, and it's Brook Lopez's number in the Raptors at that point. But man, the same summer?
Yeah. What about 10? Can I interest you in 10?
Something.
Let's look at something else here. Yeah, that's the remarkable part too, is for a certain generation of Bucks fans, Ray Allen and Michael Redd were the best players you knew in franchise history. And then you get very quickly thereafter 2 players that come in and take those numbers. And as you said, those are their numbers now. As great as Ray Allen was, as many memories as Michael Redd gave us during some pretty lean years, I'm not going to say it's forgotten, but that is no longer your number.
Yeah, and it's all respect too. Michael Redd and himself, we've heard him be very gracious about how he feels about Chris Middleton's game. He saw it more so as Chris continued to steward what 22 means in Milwaukee. And that's the right mentality. Maybe Brook Lopez will have that same mentality if Gary Harris ends up being, I don't know what we can really expect Gary Harris to be in the frame of this conversation. But it's difficult because some people were saying retire both. 34 can say Allen and it can say Giannis, 22 can say Middleton and it can say. But after the championship, I was I'm not even it's not those are their numbers.
Yeah. Well, and to that point too, 24, we all assumed would be retired for Pat Connaughton, and now it's our boy, our number 1 boy, Chris Livingston. That's got it. Yeah, it was just, look, I would imagine a majority of those of you that comment on this will be, get over it. Brooks shouldn't have his number retired. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that. I'm ready for it, but he should. He is the greatest signing in franchise history as a free agent. Something, not to give out too much ideas for content, but who would, at this point, Camille, if I put you on the spot and said, if we agree that Brook Lopez, by the numbers, is the greatest free agent signing in franchise history, who would you say is number 2?
That's a tough one off the top of my head.
I got an idea, and he's played with Brook, and we mentioned him on this show.
Come on this show. Bobby Portis?
I would say Bobby Portis at this point. Member of a championship team, and yeah.
It's fair. It is fair.
More speaks to just how lean free agency has been for this franchise.
Milwaukee Bucks,
when we're hanging our hopes on Greg Monroe and Bobby Simmons, who's still been around quite a bit this past couple of years at the arena. But yeah, it's been some lean free agency years for this Bucks team. One of the things we may get into in the coming weeks is, I've already seen one story, and you're going to start to see a lot more because we hit a nice round number. The retrospective pieces of the bubble and the return to play. One just came out on The Athletic, and I believe we're lining up with the anniversary of the Bucks first scrimmage ish. I had July 31st on the mind for something. I know they didn't start playing until mid-August, but we had some calls that were taking place too with the league explaining to us, here's how it's going to work for you to do the job. So end of July, early August to me is a time I will always remember for the bubble and everything that came into place there. And you're going to start to see a lot of those pieces come out now that it's the 5-year anniversary. So we'll take a trip down memory lane here in the coming shows and a look back at that very, very uncertain and interesting time.
One last thing here around the Brook Lopez having his number retired. Again, let us know in the comments what you think. But let the record state too that Giannis also thinks that Brook Lopez's number should be retired. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, have you seen Giannis too? Very active on social media the past.
In the offseason, he finally gets his phone back. He's on it.
I miss Chris Middleton. Me too. Retweet from Giannis.
Retweeting like old videos, fan made videos, highlighting
like
the two
Brook is the GOAT, my GOAT too. So
yeah,
it's a very active time here for Giannis. But leave your thoughts in the comments on those lineups, and we may reserve some of those for a mailbag. We've gotten quite a few questions already for the mailbag. Reminder, you can send in your questions via email to mailbag.lob@gmail.com. We tweeted that out as well, or you can tweet them to myself, Frank, and Camille. We're compiling a list now. It's probably going to take up multiple shows throughout the summer, but we'll get to the mailbag episode in the near future here. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.